Book of Time by Guillaume, Prevost. Chapter 2. The Stone Statue. Alan Faulkner's bookstore was located on Brenborn Street. It was an old Santa Mary neighborhood that has been going downhill for the last 30 or 40 years. It was an odd choice of location for a bookstore, a tiny two-story Victorian house with dingy blue columns and faded shutters, wedged between two even more run-down houses. Every other business worthy of the name had long ago been deserted from the street. The only residents now were little old people, as shabby as the fronts of their houses. They set out like ghosts early in the morning, and then returned around 9 o'clock with their shopping bags full of groceries, hurrying home to lock themselves in. Given the setting, the bookstore's opening hadn't exactly generated much neighborhood enthusiasm. A hello or good evening at most, plus a few sour comments when a customer parked partly on the sidewalk or when Sam scraped his skateboard along the curbs on his way home from school. Only Max, an old, nearly deaf man, who lived 3 or 4 houses up, bothered making conversation with the Faulkners. As Sam skateboarded down the street, he wondered yet again why his father had chosen the neglected part of town. To protect himself, suggested Grandma, and keep away from the noise of the world. Within a month of his wife's death, Alan had sold their pretty house in Bellevue suburb of Santa Mary, too many memories of Eliza, and gone looking for a place to set up his bookstore. This was a refuge for him, really, but it was an oppressive refuge when you're 13 years old. Well, 14 now. You've lost your mother, and what gets you going in the things that are happening downtown, bright lights and non-stop activity. Sam stopped outside the bookstore, climbed the stoop, and surveyed his surroundings. Nothing was stirring. He wasn't sure that coming here was a very good idea. Shouldn't he have altered or alerted his grandma first? But the tournament was canceled, and he had the whole day in front of him, and it was because of his birthday. What was wrong with dropping by his place? Because it was his place, wasn't it? Pick up a few CDs, check on his things, and make sure Dad hadn't come home unexpectedly, added a little inner voice, or left any clues about his departure. Grandma had stopped by the bookstore twice this week, but it was always possible. Sam turned the key in the lock. The door squeaked on its hinges, and the Faulkner's Antique Books sign swayed above the frame. Dad? Everything was quiet. He crossed the entryway, and then a large room with its bookshelves lined up exactly as in a library. There were tables and chairs where you could sit and look at books, and 2 sofas with halogen lights reading for comfortable reading. A good portion of the money from the Bellevue house was here, and these yellowed old papers and leather bindings. How his father managed to accumulate so many of them was a mystery, and the ability to attract the occasional customer as well. More than likely, Sam's grandparents kicked some of the money in from time to time. Sam went into the kitchen. Everything was in order. The dishwasher was empty, and from the sucking sound of the seal made when he opened it, it probably hadn't been used in several days. The refrigerator was practically bare, except for some expired containers of yogurt, a packet of sausages, and plastic, sealed in plastic, Grandma corrected him in his mind, and 2 cans of beer. No recent feast there. Sam went upstairs, and yet couldn't avoid the feeling of a pang upon entering his bedroom. There it was, Tony Hawk and the Lord of the Rings posters on the wall. His collection of miniature antique cars, very different from fingernail clippings, his drawings, and his guitar from the days when he had clumsily tried to learn to play. But he wasn't here to mope about his past. He stuck 2 old CDs in his bag, just to say he'd done so, and then went to inspect his father's office. Unfortunately, there was no letter of explanation on the desk pad, no papers about his departure in the drawers, no internet itinerary in the trash can. 3 big yellow suitcases hadn't been moved. He found one odd thing on the floor of his father's closet, a pile of white linen tunics and drawstring pants, clothes that Sam had never seen his father wear, but the rest of the wardrobe hung limply on its hangers. Stranger and stranger. Had his father left for a trip without change of clothes, or had he planned to be away only a few hours, or a day at most? Because his toothbrush was there too, completely dry, as well as a toothpaste and electric razor. Unless... Sam momentarily had a terrible vision of a car crumpled at the bottom of a ravine, but he pushed that image away. No, nothing serious could have happened to his father. Wasn't he the original eccentric? And eccentrics always pull through, Grandpa had said. There had to be some other explanation. Sam went downstairs again and stopped by the hall table where the telephone lay. The silver answering machine was blinking. 20 messages. Memory full. Sam pushed the play button. There was some background static, then a click. Mr. Faulkner, I stopped by a bookstore last week, and I saw a copy of 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, and that I wanted... Beep! Sam skipped to the next message. Is this your antique books on the Barnum Street? I'd like to know of your hours, because I'm looking for a rare edition of... Beep! Next message. Alan, this is Thomas More. Were you able to find the Phantom Bible I ordered from you? Because I have to beep, and so on. Most of the messages were from customers or people looking for things, plus one wrong number and an advertising pitch. Mr. Faulkner, if you ever plan to replace your windows or shutters, your company would like to take a request for our meeting, a banker who clearly wasn't in a good mood, and 3 attempts by Grandpa to reach her son, and messages were more than 8 days old. The one from the judo club wasn't there for a very good reason. There was no room left on the tape. One call stood out from the rest, a far-off metallic-like voice, distorted by distance or bad line quality. Alan, it's me. I know you're there. Stop being a jerk. Alan, answer me. Alan, can you hear me? Alan, pick up, for goodness sake. A long pause, and, all right, I've won you. Mysterious caller then hung up. Sam replayed the tape several times. The call had been made the day after his father's disappearance. The tone was threatening, and what was more upsetting, almost familiar. But Sam couldn't imagine who the voice could belong to. Was there some connection with his father's departure? Maybe. Given the warning, maybe not, considering that Alan couldn't have heard any of these messages. So then what? Sam had an idea. His father hadn't owned the car for the last 3 years, so he often took taxis to the train station or the airport. Taxi companies were required to keep a record of their trips. Sam had reached a detective story, so if the last call his father made was to a taxi company, it might be possible to learn where he'd gone. He pushed the phone's redial button to repeat the last outgoing number. Hello? A hoarse voice on the other end of the line. If that was the company's switchboard operator, she had better quit smoking right away. Yes, hello, he began. I'm calling for some information. What? Shouted the voice, sounding bewildered. I'd like some information, please. My father telephoned you a few days ago. Jumping Jehoshaphat, speak up. Jumping Jehoshaphat? It was Max, the neighbor who was... Max? Max, is that you? What's it about? Max, it's Sam, Alan Faulkner's son, from Antique Books. My father must have called you about 10 days ago. 10 hooks? I don't need anything. As it happens, it's certainly no hooks. Darn salesman. And the line was dead. Sam held the phone for a few seconds. His father must have called Max to give him a set of keys, ask him to water flowers or something like that. What if he had also told Max where he was going? Even if the old man was hard to follow, Sam didn't have any other clues. Sam grabbed his bag and was about to go when he saw the door of the basement, the one place he hadn't checked. He hesitated for a moment, then dropped his bag, switched on the light, and descended to 2 flights of stairs to the storage area. Alan used it to hold piles of volumes on steel racks, plus a supply of empty cartons and materials for repairing books, and had hung a very heavy tapestry on the back wall, probably to keep the damp or cold out. Sam had been down there not particularly, only a couple of times, and then mostly when they had first moved in. It was entirely his father's domain. Anyway, there was nobody there today. He began to climb back up the stairs, but he changed his mind halfway. There was something wrong. The storage area didn't look the way it usually did, or at least not the way he remembered it. It appeared to have gotten smaller. That seemed ridiculous, but the only subject Sam really excelled in at school was drawing. He had a good eye for spaces. He walked to the back wall, counting steps. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It didn't add up. The basement ought to be at least 7 yards deep, which meant... He walked over to the tapestry, a reproduction of a medieval hanging with a unicorn and a beautiful princess. He poked it with his finger and felt something hard. No, not the wall was there. All right, must have been imagining things. He knocked. The sound was distinctly hollow. Had his father added a partition and hidden it behind the curtain? But what to hide? Another storage area? For even more valuable books. Sam lifted the heavy curtain and slipped underneath. Ran his hands under the surface, gradually moving to the right. After 2 yards, he felt hinges. A door. Heart pounding, he pushed it open. Dad? The new room was empty. It was lit by a little lamp and very minimally furnished. A cot, a stool, and that was it. Sam was relieved not to find his father unconscious, or worse. But 1,000 questions crowded his mind. He walked over to the cot and noticed a big book lying on the floor. Sam picked it up, brought it close to the light. No title, no author, just a thick, cracked red cover. Opened it at random. It seemed to be a book It was called A Book of History, Crimes and Punishment during the Reign of Vlad Tepes. He quickly scanned the double page, which showed various tortures practiced by certain Vlad Tepes in the 15th century, somewhere in Wallachia, wherever that was. It was an old volume, but not that old, maybe 100 years, to judge by the typeface and printing. His father was a history buff. Would he really lock himself in this miserable storage room to read the exploits of some bloodthirsty Wallachian? Sam picked up a flashlight hanging on a hook and slowly played it over the rest of the room. There was nothing else except a grayish shape sunk into the earth at a far corner. A big stone about 20 inches high, shaped like a keyhole and rounded at the top. He went over to examine it. It looked like a totem or a voodoo object, kind of thing you'd see in horror films where a terrible curse will strike whoever discovers it. Only its front was decorated. On the top half carved sunshot out of a half-dozen slits that looked like rays. At the bottom a cavity about 2 hands deep had been hollowed out of the stone. The whole thing might have passed for a Paleolithic peanut dispenser, but without peanuts. It didn't make any sense, unless his father had suddenly joined a cult. As Sam shone his flashlight around the stone, a shiny round piece of metal a few inches away caught his eye. He picked it up and turned it over in his palm. It was a dirty coin with the symbols that suggested Arabic writing, but exactly what country it could have been from was a mystery. In any case, it seemed neither very ancient nor very valuable. Maybe the strange stone was a traditional game from some far-off country. You threw a coin, it was supposed to land either on the main cavity that counted less or in one of the rays that counted more. Really exciting. Sam tried to slip the coin into a slit, but it fell out. He tried again on the other ways, but got the same result. Only other place he could go. Somewhat dubiously, he put the coin in the center of the sun. It fit perfectly, as if there by an invisible force. Good, he said to himself, we're making progress. It was then he heard a kind of humming coming from the stone. He leaned closer, and yes, it seemed to be producing a very regular, distant vibration. Moreover, it felt as if it were giving off something. Heat. And a kind of magnetism. He even had the feeling the ground around him was starting to vibrate, and all he had to do was put his fingers on the stone. He stretched out his hand. A terrible fire ran up Sam's arm and seized his body into a blaze.